I never thought I'd be the kind of person who cared about cologne. Growing up, I was the guy who grabbed whatever was on sale at the drugstore, sprayed it twice, and called it a day. But that was before I met Felix, before I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before, like the way someone's eyes crinkle when they smile, or how their voice sounds different in the morning, rough with sleep. Before I started changing everything about myself in tiny invisible ways, hoping he'd notice. It started 3 months ago when Felix moved into the spare room of my apartment. I'd posted an ad online, nothing fancy, just looking for someone to split rent with in my 2-bedroom place near campus. I was finishing up my graduate program in architecture, working long hours, and I needed someone who'd be quiet and respectful and basically invisible. What I got was Felix, who was none of those things, and I mean that in the best possible way. The first time I opened the door and saw him standing there with 2 suitcases and a nervous smile, something shifted in my chest. He had dark, curly hair that fell into his eyes, and he kept pushing it back with his fingers in this absent way that I found immediately endearing. He was starting his PhD in literature, he told me, and he promised he'd be a good roommate, clean and quiet. He said quiet twice, actually, like he was trying to convince both of us. He lied about the quiet part. Not in a bad way, but Felix filled our apartment with life. He played music while he cooked, sang in the shower, talked to himself when he was reading. He left books everywhere, face down and open to the pages he was on, like he was having conversations with all of them at once. Within a week, the apartment felt completely different. It felt like home in a way it never had when I lived alone. We fell into a routine quickly. I'd wake up first, make coffee, and by the time it was ready, Felix would stumble out of his room, hair messy and eyes half closed, reaching for a mug like a man dying of thirst. We'd sit at the kitchen counter together, not really talking, just existing in the same space. Those quiet morning moments became my favourite part of the day. Then we'd go our separate ways. I'd head to the architecture studio and he'd disappear into the library or his room, surrounded by stacks of books with titles I couldn't pronounce. But evenings, that's when things got interesting. Felix loved to cook, really cook, not just heat up frozen meals like I'd been doing for years. He'd invite me to join him, and I'd end up chopping vegetables while he told me about whatever obscure poet he was researching. I didn't understand half of what he said, but I loved listening to him talk. He got so animated, his hands moving as he spoke, his whole face lighting up with enthusiasm. One night, about a month after he moved in, we were cooking together, and he was telling me about some French symbolist poet, and I realised I was staring at his mouth, not listening to his words, just watching the way his lips moved, the way he'd occasionally bite his lower lip when he was thinking. I nearly cut my finger with the knife. He grabbed my hand to check if I was okay, and the touch sent electricity through my entire arm. That's when I knew I was in trouble. I dated women in college, had a couple of relationships that fizzled out naturally. I'd never really questioned my sexuality because I'd never had a reason to. But standing in my kitchen with Felix's hand wrapped around my wrist, his thumb pressed against my pulse point, I felt something I'd never felt before. It was like every nerve ending in my body had suddenly woken up and was paying attention. After that night, I started noticing everything about him. The way he'd absently touch his neck when he was nervous, how he always sat with one leg tucked under him on the couch, the fact that he hummed while he made tea, different songs every time. I noticed that he wore the same grey hoodie when he was having a hard day, like it was armour. I noticed that his eyes weren't just brown, they had these flecks of gold that caught the light. And I noticed his smell. God, I sound like a creep saying that, but it's true. Felix always smelled good, like cedar and something clean and fresh, maybe bergamot. I found myself standing closer to him than necessary, making excuses to lean over his shoulder to look at something on his laptop, just to catch that scent. That's when I got the idea about the cologne. It was stupid, really. I was at the mall walking past one of those fancy department stores and I thought, what if I wore something better? What if I smelled like someone worth noticing? I went in and spent an embarrassing amount of time at the cologne counter, testing different scents on those little paper strips. The woman helping me probably thought I was insane. I finally settled on something woody and warm, with notes of sandalwood and vanilla. It was expensive, way more than I'd ever spent on cologne before, but I bought it anyway. The next morning, I put it on before leaving my room. Just a little. I didn't want to be overwhelming. I made coffee like always, and when Felix came out, I tried to act completely normal. He grabbed his mug, took a sip, and we sat in our usual comfortable silence. I was already thinking I'd wasted my money, that it was a stupid idea, that he'd never notice. Then he turned to me and said, "Did you change your cologne?" I almost dropped my coffee. My heart started pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Yeah," I managed to say, trying to sound casual. "The old one ran out, so I picked up something new." He leaned closer, and I stopped breathing. He was smelling me. Felix was actually leaning in and inhaling, and I thought I might die right there at my kitchen counter. "I like it," he said, and then he smiled this small, private smile that made my stomach flip. "It suits you better." That was it. 4 words. "It suits you better?" But the way he said it, the way he looked at me when he said it, like he'd been paying attention to how I smelled before, like he'd noticed me the same way I'd been noticing him. I couldn't stop thinking about it all day. I replayed that moment over and over in my mind during my design review, while I was working on my thesis project, on the bus ride home. He'd noticed. Felix had noticed. Things shifted after that, or maybe I just started seeing what was already there. I caught him looking at me sometimes, quickly glancing away when our eyes met. We started sitting closer together on the couch during our evening routine of watching whatever show we were binging. Close enough that our shoulders touched, that I could feel the warmth of his body next to mine. One Friday night we were watching a movie, some thriller he'd picked, and there was a particularly tense scene. Felix grabbed my arm without thinking, his fingers digging into my bicep. When the scene ended, he realised what he'd done and started to pull away, apologising. I caught his hand before he could. "It's okay," I said, and I laced my fingers through his. We sat like that for the rest of the movie, holding hands, neither of us saying a word about it. I couldn't tell you what happened in the last half of that film. All I could focus on was the feeling of his palm against mine, the way his thumb occasionally brushed across my knuckles. When the movie ended, we just sat there in the flickering light from the TV. Felix turned to look at me, and there was something vulnerable in his expression, something open and scared and hopeful all at once. "Dylan," he said quietly, and my name had never sounded like that before, weighted with meaning. "Yeah," I whispered back. "I need to tell you something, but I'm terrified I'm going to ruin everything." My heart was racing again. "You won't," I said, even though I had no idea what he was about to say. He took a shaky breath. "I like you. Not as a roommate, I mean, yes, as a roommate too, but that's not what I mean. I like you, Dylan. I've liked you since the first week I moved in, and it's been driving me crazy living with you, and pretending I don't feel this way. And I know this is probably not what you want to hear, and I'll move out if this makes things weird, but I couldn't keep pretending anymore." I stared at him, processing his words. Felix liked me. Felix had liked me for months. All this time I'd been tying myself in knots, changing my cologne, looking for signs, and he'd been feeling the same way. I started laughing, which was probably not the reaction he expected because his face fell, and he tried to pull his hand away from mine. I held on tighter. "Felix, wait. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because I spent $80 on cologne just to get you to notice me. I've been losing my mind for weeks trying to figure out if you might feel the same way. I've never felt like this about anyone before. I didn't even know I could feel like this about a guy until I met you." His eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," I confirmed. "I like you too. So much it's kind of terrifying." He smiled then, this huge, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "So the cologne was for me?" "Completely for you. Is that pathetic?" "It's the best thing anyone's ever done for me," he said, and then he was leaning in, and I was leaning in, and we were kissing. I'd been kissed before, obviously, but never like this. Never with this feeling of rightness, like every piece of my life had suddenly clicked into place. Felix's hand came up to cup my jaw, and I pulled him closer, trying to eliminate any space between us. He tasted like the chocolate we'd been eating during the movie, sweet and perfect. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "I can't believe this is happening," he whispered. "Me neither," I said. "But I'm really glad it is." We stayed up talking until 3 a.m. that night, curled up together on the couch. We talked about everything. He told me about his last relationship, a guy he'd dated in undergrad who'd broken his heart. I told him about my confusion over the past few months, about realizing I was attracted to him, and not knowing what that meant about my identity. He listened without judgment, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said. "Labels are helpful for some people. But you don't owe anyone a specific identity. You just have to know what you feel and who you want to be with. I want to be with you, I said, and saying it out loud felt like the most honest thing I'd ever said. Good, he replied, kissing my temple, because I really want to be with you too. Dating your roommate is probably not the smartest idea, but with Felix, it worked. We were already comfortable with each other, already knew each other's routines and quirks. The only thing that changed was that now I could kiss him good morning when he stumbled out for coffee. Now we fell asleep in the same bed, tangled up in each other. Now I could hold his hand whenever I wanted, touch him without second-guessing myself. We kept it quiet at first, not because we were hiding exactly, but because it felt precious and new, something we wanted to keep just for ourselves for a while. My sister was the first person I told. I called her one Sunday afternoon while Felix was at the library and I just blurted it out. I'm dating someone, a guy, my roommate. His name is Felix and I think I'm falling in love with him. There was a pause, and then she said, Okay, are you happy? Really happy, I said. Then I'm happy for you. When do I get to meet him? It was that simple. She didn't make a big deal out of it, didn't ask a million questions about my sexuality, or what this meant for my future. She just cared that I was happy. I cried a little after we hung up, overwhelmed with relief. Felix told his parents next. He'd been out since high school, so it wasn't a big revelation for them, but he was nervous about telling them he was dating his roommate. They're going to think I have terrible judgment, he said, pacing around the living room. Why? I'm a catch, I joked, trying to lighten the mood. He stopped pacing and looked at me. You really are, though. That's what I'm going to tell them. That I met someone amazing who makes me laugh every day and remembers how I like my tea and listens to me ramble about dead poets without complaining. I like when you ramble about dead poets, I said. See? Perfect. He kissed me quickly and then called his mum. I could only hear his side of the conversation, but it seemed to go well. When he hung up, he was smiling. She wants to meet you. Both of them do. They're coming to visit next month. Meeting Felix's parents was terrifying. I spent the week before they arrived stress cleaning the apartment and interrogating Felix about what they liked, what they expected, whether they'd think I was good enough for their son. He finally grabbed my face in both hands and made me look at him. Dylan, they're going to love you because I love you. It's that simple. It was the first time either of us had said it out loud. I love you. 3 words that changed everything. You love me? I asked, my voice cracking slightly. Of course I love you, he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I've loved you since you let me reorganize the kitchen cabinets by frequency of use. I've loved you since you started leaving sticky notes on my laptop with terrible poetry puns to make me smile. I love you, Dylan. I love you too, I said. And then we were both crying and laughing and kissing, and I'd never felt so completely, perfectly happy. His parents did love me, or at least they were kind enough to pretend they did. His mum hugged me like she'd known me for years, and his dad shook my hand firmly and said, Felix tells us you're an architect. That's a solid profession. By the end of the weekend, his mum was showing me embarrassing baby photos, and his dad was giving me advice about graduate school. They treated me like family, and it made me understand where Felix got his warmth, his easy affection. My own parents were harder. I drove home to tell them in person, bringing Felix with me for moral support. He waited in the car while I went inside, which was probably smart. My dad didn't say much, just nodded slowly when I told him. My mum cried, which I'd expected, but not for the reason I thought. I just want you to be happy, she said, wiping her eyes. And I'm sorry if we ever made you feel like you couldn't tell us something like this. You didn't, I assured her. I didn't even know until recently. This is all new for me too. They met Felix that day, and while it was awkward at first, by the time we left, my mum was hugging him goodbye and making him promise to come back for Thanksgiving. It wasn't perfect, but it was okay, and okay felt like enough. 6 months after that first kiss, Felix and I were lying in bed on a lazy Sunday morning. Sunlight was streaming through the curtains, and he was reading while I sketched ideas for a project. It was perfectly ordinary and perfectly perfect. He put down his book and rolled over to look at me. What? I asked, smiling at his expression. I'm just happy, he said. I'm lying here thinking about how I almost didn't tell you how I felt that night. I was so scared I'd ruin our friendship, that I'd have to move out and never see you again. And now I can't imagine my life without this, without us. I set down my sketchbook and pulled him close. I'm glad you were brave enough to say something. I don't think I would have been. Yes, you would have, he said confidently. Eventually. You changed your cologne for me, Dylan. That's pretty brave, I laughed. That's pretty pathetic, you mean? No, he said seriously, propping himself up on his elbow to look down at me. It's brave to want someone to notice you. It's brave to try, even in small ways. You were putting yourself out there without even realizing it. I pulled him down for a kiss, slow and sweet. I love you, I said against his lips. I love you too, he replied, even though you still occasionally grab the wrong cologne and wear that awful drugstore stuff. Hey, that's my backup cologne. Show some respect. He grinned and kissed me again. We stayed in bed for another hour, talking and laughing and just being together. Later we'd get up and make breakfast, probably get into a playful argument about whether pancakes or waffles were superior. We'd spend the day doing ordinary things, grocery shopping and cleaning and working on our respective projects. And it would be perfect, because we'd be doing it together. I never expected to fall in love with my roommate. I never expected to discover this part of myself, to realize I could feel this way about a man. But Felix changed everything. He made me braver, more open, more myself than I'd ever been. And it all started because he noticed when I changed my cologne, because he'd been paying attention to me the same way I'd been paying attention to him. Sometimes the biggest changes in our lives come from the smallest moments. A new cologne, a hand held during a movie, the courage to say, I like you, even when you're terrified of the answer. I'm grateful every day that Felix was brave enough to take that risk, and that I was open enough to see what was right in front of me all along. We're still living in that same apartment, still splitting rent, still cooking dinner together most nights. But now it's our home, not just a place we share. Now when I wake up in the morning, Felix is usually sprawled across my chest, snoring softly. Now the bathroom counter has both of our colognes lined up, mine and his, and sometimes he wears mine and I wear his just because we can. I'm finishing my thesis this semester, and Felix is deep into his dissertation research. We're talking about what comes next, about whether we'll stay in this city or move somewhere new for jobs. Whatever we decide, we'll decide together. That's what I love most about this, about us. We're a team now, partners in every sense of the word. Last week Felix asked me what I'd been thinking about that morning when he first noticed my cologne, the morning that started everything. I told him the truth. I'd been thinking that I wanted him to see me, really see me, the way I saw him. I wanted to be someone worth noticing. He got quiet for a moment, then took my hand. Dylan, I noticed you the day I moved in. I noticed everything about you. The cologne was just an excuse to say something, to see if maybe you'd been noticing me too. So maybe we were both trying, in our own ways, to bridge that gap between friendship and something more. Maybe we were both scared and hopeful and brave, even when we didn't feel like it. And maybe that's what love is really. Noticing someone, letting yourself be noticed, and having the courage to say something about it. I'm glad I changed my cologne. I'm glad Felix noticed. I'm glad we were both brave enough to take a chance on something uncertain and scary and absolutely worth it. Because now I get to wake up every morning next to the person who sees me, really sees me, and loves what he sees. And I get to see him too. This incredible, beautiful, infuriating, perfect person who fills my life with poetry and laughter and love. That's my story. The story of how I fell in love with my roommate, how I discovered parts of myself I didn't know existed, and how a simple change in cologne became the beginning of everything that matters.